my religion that teaches me that I must kneel to the cross of Christ prior to speaking to his people. But you will never see me kneel when our glorious flag is flying, because I am an American. You know, a minute ago, and I've been thinking about that, he changed my speech, which is good. He's bringing me outside of the podium. But while that young man was talking, I don't know if you noticed, this tree was moving, and those were still. Did you see it? Did you see the flag flying in the wind as you spoke patriotic words? There's no doubt in my mind those patriots of yesterday are looking down upon the voice of today and tomorrow, thanking you. And if I may, before I really start anything, you might have to sing me down. My mother's old regular Baptist, so I'm unworthy to wear this uniform. I'm not a Robert E. Lee, and I'd like to share with you how I became chosen. You say, how do you become chosen? Well, I didn't choose Lee. I think he must have chose me. And it all happened at a cemetery. A fellow Vietnam veteran had passed away, and we was dedicating his grave. And I'm a member of the brigade. I'm sitting there ready to fire, and the captain gives us the command, ready, fire, ready, fire. Well, on the third one, there was a little lady about where you was at, 92-year-old, in a wheelchair, and she started hollering, when's General Lee going to say something? When's that general going to say something? Sassy little thing. And her son tried to quiet down. Mama, General Lee's not here. And she said, don't patronize me, son. I'll speak when I want to speak because I'm 92 years old. Well, we fired that last volley, and the captain went over and looked at it and said, ma'am, I'm sorry, General Lee is not here. And to my horror, she said, oh yeah, he is, pointed at me. Now you have to remember, this is 20-something years ago, and my beard was black, and I didn't look a thing like Lee. I'm in a green uniform. And I go to her and I said, ma'am, I apologize, I'm no General Lee. She looked at me with that little sassy face and said, you ought to be ashamed of yourself. You look like him, you should start acting like him. I said, yes, ma'am. And I stepped away. Well, I was some other place, and someone said, you would make a good Lee. And I said, I'm not worthy. Well, this lady who had taken me under her wing, because you see, my father was shot when I was a day after my 6th birthday, and I died due to his wounds. He was Greek. And he passed away, and Jim Jackson, good seeing you. And my mother married this man that was very abusive, and at 12 years old, she left me not because she didn't love me, but she loved me so much that she took all the abuse upon herself. And I found myself alone in this little 4-room shack and no running water, and this lady at the mouth holler, Mama G, took me under her wing. Now you know what this type of Mama Jeans are. She would never give me anything. I worked for everything. Boy, take out that trash. I didn't know my name until I was about 14 years old. I thought it was boy. Boy, take out that trash. I'll fix you a hot dog. She owned a little restaurant down there, and she took me under her wing, and she nurtured me. And one day she came to me and said, I'm having a little celebration, get together, and you're going to be my keynote speaker. I said, yes, ma'am. What do you want me to speak on? I said, you'll know when you get there. And I thought it was about the school I had been setting up for adjudicated youth and troubled children. So I prepared my speech, and she said, now don't come in the door till 6:30. Well, I noticed the program started at 6, and I thought, Anyway, I got there, and at 6:30 opened the door, and she's at the podium. And she looked at me and said, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, Robert E. Lee. I'm going, where? And she looked at me and said, and out behind the podium, she pulled a jacket out and a hat. And I had the floor. And the podium shook because I was so scared. I was unworthy of such an honor to speak to about a man that I barely knew. And I spoke for 30 minutes, not knowing what I said, just meandering top of my head, trying to not look so ignorant. And as I left her little gathering, it turned out to be 186 people from across the nation called the Back Box Society. As I left, I got about halfway and you could hear a pin drop. And then all of a sudden, everybody stood up and started clapping. Standing ovation. And as I walked through the door, I said, "Dear God, if this is what you want me to do, I will try my best to do the best that I can." And for 26 years, I have tried my best, and each day learning. And I think I will learn until I actually get to meet the good Lord and those men I so admire are patriots on this Memorial Weekend. And then you think about what's happening in our country today, and he brought this in mind. I had my speech ready, but he brought some things. You know, how we used to be admired, the General Jackson, Jefferson Davis, all these characters. Well, myself, I remember I was in Roanoke, Virginia. I spoke to a library convention, and I was trying to peddle some of my books and stuff, to be quite honest, and I spoke as lead. And I was to speak in Knoxville, Tennessee at 6:30, and I was running late. So, you know how crowds do, they was talking to me and doing a little book signing, and I noticed I was a little late, so I got an old Traveler, big little Jeep I had, and Traveler has a tendency to kind of speed along. And I jumped in that Jeep and took off down through there with my uniform on, and I thought I'm changing from my speech to library to UDC. So I was practicing that, and I put my tape in of Dixie Gray, playing all them things, and I'm just listening away, and all of a sudden at 81, Virginia State Trooper goes flying up that way, lights on, and I thought, I don't remember seeing a wreck. And then all of a sudden, he happened to hit a fairway there where he crossed over. And he did this routine, came back, and I thought, must be down there. And when I looked at my speedometer, I realized I was the wreck. I was about 15 miles above the speed limit in Virginia. I also had a gun in the back. I had a knife in the back. I had a sword in the back. I'm going to jail. That's my first thought. I'm going to jail. And time I stopped, he was on me, dust a flying, and he comes to me, and I watched him put his hat on with attitude. And he came to the window, if I were looking at me, he said, "Sir, do you know you was recklessly driving and that you was clocked 15 plus miles an hour above the speed limit? Going to jail." And he said, "I want you to show me your registration, your driver's license, proof of insurance, and whatever you do, do not put your hand off the steering wheel." I'm going, oh. He goes back, and I'm watching him right. And I'm going to jail. I'm going to jail. And I remember my daughter said, "When in doubt, look up." And I looked up, and there on my visor, she had clipped all that information. Good daughter. And when he came around, for some reason I put this hat on. I have no idea why, this old 26-year-old hat. And he came around, and he kind of looked at me like this. And he said, "Sir, you put me in a quagmire." Now, I weren't sure what that term meant at that time. I lived, and I had a barn. I thought I might have been stepping in quagmire all that time. I didn't know. But he said, "I did not tell you in a timely manner that you was speeding over 15 miles per hour." And I started saying, "Sir, please." And I did not tell you that you was driving in a reckless manner. Obviously, you was avoiding something that was in the road. And I'm not a dumb person. I'm going. And then his eyes softened, and when he looked at me, he said, "Sir, my wife loves you, my child adores you, and my captain has a picture of you in headquarters, state police headquarters. And how could I live in the great state of Virginia knowing I gave Robert E. Lee a speeding ticket?" And he said, "Sir, if you will sign this statement, get a warning, I will let you go." And you know, I kept my word up, Mr. President, all the way up to the Tennessee line. But what about that? A man being that revered, and now our history and heritage, and I'm talking about all American history and heritage, being destroyed. You are the remnants of a grand army. You people know the truth. And I believe it's the Bible that says you should know the truth, and the truth will set you free. And our job is to carry forth that torch of enlightenment, like this young man did a minute ago, like he tries to do so often. Good job. And that we must remember our past, or we would never have a true future.
Amen.
So, I don't know how much time I have. I have been known to talk quite a bit, but I'd like to give you a glimpse into what I feel is the making of General Lee. Taking close. Howdy. God knows we didn't want this war. I did not want this war. You did not want this war, people. It was thrust upon us. But my friends, it was not thrust upon us by those boys in blue. The one just went by a minute ago. For you see, I was a boy in blue. My father was Harry Lighthorse Lee. I am the son of revolution, and I yield to none in my love for this country. For 36 years of my life, I served as a federal soldier. I have been all over this country, and I love every inch which I traversed. But this war was thrust upon us by politicians who had lost that ability to compromise. People like Henry Clay. Newspapers with editors for the price of the paper to sell the sensationalism. You're talking about an industrial north, seeing that agricultural south, owning 95% of all the ports that we will soon be forced to reckon with, and taxation. And someone said slavery. Well, if you know anything about me and my wife, and if you know anything about my mother-in-law, who married George Washington Custis. Now, who was George Washington Custis, you ask? George Washington Custis was biological grandson of Martha Washington. He was known as the boy of Mount Vernon because he was adopted by George Washington. And everything that George Washington had when he died in 1799, my father-in-law inherited, which included his slave. My mother-in-law was an outspoken woman at her time. And she used to have parties, and when I looked at that hill, it reminded me, she had this beautiful house up on a hill, 1,100 acres, it was called Arlington. And my mother-in-law would have social gatherings. And when those social gatherings would include chief justices, representatives, presidents all the way up to Abraham Lincoln, he did not manage to come up. But my mother-in-law would always have a person beside of her. Actually, one of my wife's best friend, her name was Selena Gray, Selena Norris Gray. And she would bring the question of slavery up. And she is the one who taught me that in the enlightened age, few can doubt that slavery is a morally corrupt political institution that must be abolished in order for America to survive, but you simply cannot turn the black man or black woman loose. You must educate him so we have a way of making a living. And that is what the Arlington household, the Custis household, the Washington household did. And you've talked to Selena Gray. Look at her story. Well, my decision had been long, just like President Davis, been a long time coming. Because like he said, I had fought in 46, I'd fought under, actually, old Fuss and Feathers, some of the soldiers called him. I dare not. I call him my mentor. I call him that male man I needed as a fatherly figure, Winfield Scott. And he once said to me, he said, given the opportunity, Captain Lee would prove to be the greatest captain of the ages. And I often wonder how I must have disappointed that man. A knock upon the door came at Arlington, April 19th, 1861. I had just returned from my Texas group, my little 2nd Brigade. I love my Texans. And I was tending the affairs of the house, and a knock on the door came, and I went to the door. I was dressed just in my blue vest. And the young lieutenant looked at me and saluted, "Colonel, sir, the President of the United States requires your attendance," and gave me a paper. I did not read it. I stuck it in my pocket. Now, if you've been married as long as I have, my Mary, who was always there beside me, in her rolling chair, she looked up at me and said, "My captain, I fear it's the news you have dread this long." And I said, "Oh, Mary." Now, she called me her captain of madam of rank because she said I was the captain of her heart. And so I had my horse, which was named Darling Grace, that I brought back from the war, sir, Mexican War, and had it saddled. And as I went out, as was the tradition in Arlington, the servants went out with my wife, along with Precious Life, my youngest one, that I used to love so much and spoil a bit. And as I got in the saddle, William McLean, Turner Hall, Old Perry, Selena Gray, and some of her nephews and nieces were there. And Old Perry comes up, placed a hand on my leg, and looks up at me and said, "We all prayed for you, Marshal." They knew what was coming. They understood, as did my family. I went down that 1.25 mile gauntlet, and if you look at Arlington, you'd realize that Arlington's up here, and if you go 1.25 miles down across the river, that is Washington City. And I went to meet the newly elected president, and he was busy raising 75,000 troops. Now, my father, for 7 years, was a Revolutionary War soldier. 2 of my grand uncles signed the Declaration of Independence, Francis and Richard. I was born in the very room that they were born in. Exactly. And as I went to meet the man they directed me to, Mr. Blair, Francis Preston Blair, distant relative I've married into our family, I could not help but think, how can you raise 75,000 men to put down a rebellion in a sister state? Because I'm sure you remember, sir, what we studied at West Point. West Point taught us that our allegiance lay with our state, and that as centralized government we had entered voluntarily into that, and we could voluntarily leave. So I was very, very concerned. And I met Mr. Blair, and he's one of these pompous politicians. And he looked at me and said, "Sir, on behalf of the President of the United States, I am hereby authorized to offer you complete command of the Army of the Potomac." Ladies and gentlemen, complete command of the greatest army at that time to ever exist. A greater army was about to emerge. And all I had to do was say yes. And if I said yes, my wife could keep Arlington, 1,100 acres. She could keep Romancoke, 4,000 acres. Shirley, which was 1,800 acres. She could keep the White House, 400 to 500 acres. I can't remember all the acreage in the islands. She could maintain that. And there were rumors, "So if you do this, you will be the next president of the United States." And I will exempt you from this statement, Mr. President, but people know my sentiment about politicians. I said they were only good for 2 purposes: to chew tobacco and eat peanuts while my army starved. I had disdain for politics. Did not want to be. Well, I asked him for one day, and I went home, and my wife's very perceptive, and I looked at my Mary and said, "Dear Mims, I begged leave for supper and let me go upstairs." And my wife wrote in her journal, She wrote the following. She said, quote, I could hear my beloved husband pacing back and forth in the upstairs hallway. And at one juncture, he fell to his knees, and I hear him cry out, dear God, take this from our country. Take this from our people. Take this from me. I'm unworthy to serve. And when he came down the stairs, it was as if the great effusion of blood come from his eyes. But I saw in his countenance a resolve, nay, a peace. And I knew his decision without asking. And that night, the house of Lee was the house of the dead. The next morning, my beloved husband came down the stairs, put on the old blue jacket he had worn for over 30 years, got his black slouch hat, tasseled the hair of the youngest, the one he called Precious Life, kissed me on the forehead, and was his custom when he got to the door, he bid us all adieu. And I knew that he had graced the halls of Arlington for the last time, end quote. That is the only time in my life that I know my wife was wrong, for I got to come home one day. But this time they had a carriage waiting for me, what they call a taxi. And I went down, and again, I was sent to Mr. Blair. And Mr. Blair was in the mood. He looked at me and said, sir, I have no time. What is your decision? And mustering all the strength I could, and thinking about my father, and my mother, George Washington, my wife's great-grandfather, that American flag, I said the following. Sir, though I love this Union, I love Virginia more. I cannot, I will not, I dare not draw my sword, saving her defense. And I hear her calling me. She says, she sings to me. She says, Virginia, Virginia, Virginia. He dismissed me. And I went and resigned my commission, praying to God my poor service would not be called upon. But on the next day, another knock on the door, this time a judge from Richmond. And he looked at me and said, Colonel Lee, Virginia calls. And I said, her voice I must answer. And I went, knowing that by me going, my wife would lose everything that she had. But my wife followed the biblical scriptures, saying, where you goeth, I go. Your plight will be mine. And I kept begging her, please leave Arlington. They will come. And she left. And about a week later, some unscrupulous men in blue came. And they started gathering stuff up and taking things. And the big portrait that still hangs in Arlington today of George Washington, one drew a sword and slashed it. And in comes Selena Gray, eyes ablaze, seeing what's going on. And says, oh my God, no, you cannot take that stuff. That belonged George Washington, your president. How could you do that? And she would get it and put it on the mantle and she'd holler, help, help me, help me. And there was a major that heard her cry and brought some good soldiers that had belonged to Lee. And that major looked at him and said, the next man takes one thing. I promise you, I will kill here, I will kill now. He will not desecrate this home. And those things that Selena Gray saved, Selena Norris Gray saved, can still be seen in the Smithsonian. In fact, you can say she's the very first person that ever started preserving our American history and heritage. Selena Gray was the keeper of the keys. Selena Gray was married in the Middle Arch. My lovely wife made her dress, along with my daughters. I alone thought her husband to be a nice suit. Did I mention that Selena was black? She was not a slave. She was family. She was family. And one day before the Emancipation Proclamation freed only the slaves of the South, and I often thought if I was black and lived in Kentucky, the 250,000, what would I have thought? Or another state. But one day, April 31st, 1862, before the Emancipation Proclamation came out, I freed 172 slaves, as was my agreement with my father-in-law, the slaves of Arlington. And I pray God with the education, and that they will go out and remember the truth of our American history. For ladies and gentlemen, I'm nothing more than a voice of the past, begging the voice of today to pass to the rising generation our history and our heritage, for I fear there will come a time when they will not be known, and patriotism will be no more. And a mantle of freedom will be shattered upon the ground. For link by link, our American rights are being taken from us. And upon your shoulders, I pray to God that you will carry on the mission that we have begun. Because if we don't, America will die within the next 10 to 12 years. Thank you.